brought us to school. We had to take the subway. And my parents, because they were concerned about my safety, really drilled into my head, don't talk to anyone, do not even make eye contact with anyone. And this is why if you've been to New York and you've ridden the subway, you see that people do not interact with one another. Everybody has their headphones on, or they're plugged into some device, or they have their head buried in a newspaper. And I spent most of my life that way. That I would go into an apartment building elevator, and I would be surrounded by the people who live in my building, and we would never once acknowledge one another, not even with a smile or a good morning. Most of my life, I was very wary of strangers. And it took my being a bed and breakfast owner to break me of that. Because we had thousands of people from all over the world, strangers, stay in our home, sleep under our roof. And that gift of hospitality is really what we're talking about today in Touching Strangers. That's what it's about. Now, next Sunday, we're going to have a new members class. And 22 people in this church are going to be instructed in becoming new members. And many of them are strangers to one another and to our church family. But when they are welcomed, they're all going to receive a pin. And the pin has the motto of the UCC on it. And that motto is, that they may all be one. I am so proud to represent a denomination who has that motto of oneness. And that saying comes from John 17, where Jesus says to God, I pray that they may all be one as I am in you, and you are in me, and we are in them. That we are all united as sons and daughters of God. When you walk in this church, in the foyer, you'll see there a big sign that says welcome, and a list of what it means to be a progressive Christian. And one of the statements says, we recognize that there are people who have other names for the way to God, and we acknowledge that their ways are true for them, as ours is true for us. This is what it means to look at every single person, no matter where they are in life, and to recognize the light that's in them. This is what Touching Strangers is about. For those of you who are new this week, the exhibit whose photographs are on the wall is the latest exhibit at Saugatuck Center for the Arts. The photographer his name is Richard Rinaldi. And over the past several years, he just took strangers that he met on the street, and he had them come together and pose for pictures with one another, very intimate photos, as if they were a family. So for example, the photo that's up here on the podium, he just found that young man in the middle, and then a few moments later spotted those two women and had them pose very intimately. And if you come on Tuesday night, you will hear the stories behind these, but you'll hear how these experiences kind of transform these strangers, that after posing for the photograph, they no longer looked at this person as the other. It's a beautiful thing. Today, what Barbara was referring to at the beginning during the announcements is, today what we're going to do is we're going to invite you to find someone in this room today who is a stranger to you. Someone who maybe you've seen on Sunday, but you don't know their name and you really don't know them well. And we're going to have a camera set up in the Friendship Hall. And we're going to invite you to touch that stranger, and we'll take a photograph of you together, very much like the exhibit that's here. I had the opportunity of hearing Richard Rinaldi speak at Saugatuck Center for the Arts and explain the exhibit. And he said during that talk, in America, we like boundaries, and we take for granted our invisible bubble. Very few times do we intentionally touch people. Perhaps it's only during a handshake. It's the one instance where it's permissible to put your hands on the body of a stranger. And I really thought about that. When we meet someone for the first time, we extend our hand. And when I was doing some research about it, I thought, well, where did the handshake start? And the legend is that in the early Roman times, it was a way to say, I don't have any weapons on me. And I'm extending my arm to show you that I'm open, and I'm here in friendship. But I love the idea of one palm touching the other palm. Very much like we're taught as children to pray, to put our palms together in a very intimate way. The word intimacy comes from the Latin word intimus, and what it means is innermost. And we hear in the Psalms, of course, that God created our innermost being. And so I like to think that a handshake is my innermost being touches your innermost being. And no longer are we two, but we're one. Now, our friends of the Buddhist and Hindu traditions talk about this term called non-duality. You may have heard of that. Non-duality means there's not two-ness, but there's oneness, that everything is connected. And we know that science has demonstrated that as well. Carl Sagan famously said in Cosmos that we are made of star stuff, and that we are the way the stars look back on themselves, that we have the same makeup, everything. Everything is connected, all people, all of creation. We see in the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo has the finger of Adam touching the finger of God. And that was replicated in E.T., if you remember, when the little boy Elliot touches E.T., the celestial and the human touching. And I believe that's what Jesus meant when he said, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. We are one. It's not two, it's one. Many of you are familiar with the name Vivekananda, because in Ganges there's a monastery. I'm sure you see the big sign, Vivekananda Monastery. Our friend Jerry is very well connected with the Vivekananda Monastery. Well, Swami Vivekananda said, the secret to everything is oneness. And here's his quote. He said, get rid in the first place of all these limited ideas that we are separate from one another, and begin to see God in every person, working through all hands, walking through all feet, and eating through every mouth. In every being, God lives. Through all minds, God thinks. God is self-evident, nearer to us than ourselves. To know this is religion, is faith. So long as there is one that breathes throughout the universe, I live in that one. I am not this limited little being. I am the universal. Oneness is the secret of everything. I really love that. And you know, the Christian mystics, that's what they were about. And I've shared with you before stories of St. John of the Cross and St. Francis of Assisi, who talked about the lover and the beloved dissolving into one. This is the idea that there is not two, but one. Now, it is very easy for us to feel connected to God when we look at the beautiful stars in the sky, or a sunset, or we're cuddling a little kitten. But it is hard for us to sometimes see God in those who are very different from us. Those who have a different way of thinking, have different political beliefs, are people who can be very annoying to us. It is difficult for us to see the oneness there. But it is what Jesus is calling to us in today's gospel, which just happens to fit so perfectly with touching strangers. It's a wonderful parable about, well, hey, I've been working all day, and you mean I get the same amount of money as the person who only worked 1 hour? That's just not fair. And we hear the landowner saying, are you envious because I'm generous to everyone? And we hear there is no last and there is no first, there's no line, there's only God. And many of us do this today. I think a lot of the whole issue that some people have with the Affordable Care Act is that, saying, hey, I've been working my whole life to get this really good insurance for myself, and now you're saying that some lazy person who doesn't even work gets the same health care I do? That's not fair. Or some people say that with affirmative action. Hey, I have the same exact experience, and I have the same exact education as that person. Why are they getting the job over me? That's not fair. And we begin to look at one another as the other. And we have this sense of hierarchy. Some Christians have that today. You must accept Jesus as your Savior. And if you don't, you're the other. So I love this gospel reading, because Jesus is saying to us, there is no last and there is no first. You are all the same in the eyes of God. In our words of integration this morning that Graham read for us, the Reverend Ed Townley said that because we are all united, each of us is affected by the choice we all make. Some of you may be familiar with the butterfly effect, which is this theory that just the little flappings of a butterfly's wings in Brazil could lead to a tornado in Texas. That just some small, because we're all connected, that just some small little action could affect the greater. And I think of that sometimes when I am not at peace, when I get frustrated or angry, and I think, this small act of me, Sal Sapienza, getting angry, is part of the unrest in the world. I think that's very important for us to remember, is that our little action has impact on everyone else, since we're all connected. And so our job as we grow spiritually and mature spiritually is to awaken to this idea of oneness, and to see God in everyone, in everything, and see that we are all equal. And then we are to follow Jesus' commandment, which is to love one another. And so I invite you, after our service today, to connect with someone that you don't know well. And we'll take a photograph together, and we'll dissolve that two-ness into oneness.